Welcome to GTM Navigator by Capital, our ongoing series where we break down the essential components of nailing the right go-to-market strategy. I'm Daley, Senior Associate here at Fin. Today, we're diving into RevOps with Bryan Caplin at Thoropass. Thoropass is an enterprise-ready compliance platform that lets growing companies compete on the same level as any organization. They help companies design stage-appropriate controls, obtain InfoSec certifications and audits, stay compliant with regulations, and build trust with enterprise customers. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. Bryan, welcome to Fin Capital's GTM Navigator. It's great to have you on today to talk about one of my most requested topics for our early stage portfolio, and thanks for taking the time. To start off, especially for a lot of our early stage founders kind of join the call who might be a bit less familiar with RevOps, would be really curious in your role at Thoropass today, how do you define the RevOps function?
Yeah. For me, a high-performing RevOps function are kind of my eyes and ears of what's actually happening in the business day to day, right? If, as a CRO, you're likely across many different functions: new business, marketing, renewals, expansion, partnerships. And, it can be hard to really, stay focused on, the underlying mechanics of the business, what's going well, what's not going well, trends that we're seeing. So to me, a RevOps function, beyond the very tactical things that they do, from putting in place your tech stack and ensuring your deals are progressing from a Salesforce perspective, and salespeople are getting paid on time, all of the very tactical things which we can talk about. For me, they're providing hopefully insights into what's actually happening on the business. They're spotting things before I am, or even my leaders are, and bringing them to our attention, whether that be pipeline trends or closed won and closed lost trends or renewal trends. So they are bringing those actionable insights that hopefully inform your sales and go-to-market strategy.
That's really helpful. And I'm curious, kind of what business kind of KPIs do those kind of insights typically tie to? You mentioned a few different strands there across, current contracts, net new, even going as far as pipeline. Kind of what are the kind of key KPIs you typically kind of tie the results of the RevOps function to?
Well, really every element of your sales funnel, for sure, right? So I lean on them to help me understand, what's happening in our top of funnel, lead generation, right? What are our stats on from an outbound perspective, whether that's email open rate and engagement rate, or connections on the phone, right? So are we being efficient and effective from a top of funnel perspective? Going further down the funnel, they're helping me understand where are we having success or not having success from a funnel progression perspective, right? Where are our deals getting stalled? Are there any trends there by account executive or customer size or location or industry? And then, when we get down to the bottom of the funnel, when we win, why are we winning? When we lose, why are we losing? What are the pricing trends that we're seeing there, right? So there's a whole set of KPIs and metrics that they are helping me keep my eyes on from a new business perspective. From a existing business side, somewhat similar, right? What's happening from a renewal rate perspective, from an expansion opportunity when we are expanding, what's true about those organizations and how should we shift our focus there? Certainly looking at NDR and GDR, right? Is our book of business growing over time? And if so, how and where? And helping us make smarter decisions on the customers we spend our time with, and those that maybe we spend less time with. And then pulling back, they're helping with territory strategy and design, with comp plan strategy and design, book of business segmentation. So really putting the infrastructure and helping with org design to further enable us to hit whatever targets we're trying to hit.
Yeah, no, I love the way you put that, kind of building this infrastructure to connect the different teams. I've worked at a handful of kind of B2B SaaS companies and things of that nature, and that kind of disconnect typically between kind of sales, customer success, all with kind of different KPIs. And I feel like there's always a kind of struggle of, all align them into kind of one vision, one journey, but also sharing insights between them that benefit each other. And that seems to be a kind of key part of the infrastructure here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
And how does this kind of differ to people who might be joining the call and thinking, oh, it sounds quite like kind of sales ops as well? Is that part of RevOps, or is it a kind of different category to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think sales ops was kind of how this function started, right? It was very
Mm,
much focused on new business, right? Supporting the sales organization and helping them become more effective and understand what's working, what's not. I think
mm,
over time, CROs and CFOs have realized, well, you can also apply a lot of their same, methodologies and tools to the other parts of the go-to-market organization, whether that be the customer side of the house or marketing, partnerships, et cetera. So, RevOps is a more all-encompassing, function and description
yeah.
that, supports not just the new business organization, but the complete kind of, bow tie or funnel or however you want to, think about your go-to-market function.
Awesome. That's really helpful. And as you know at Fin, we work with teams as early as pre-seed, where maybe founder-led sales is the dominant approach, and then all the way through to pre-IPO, where those teams will typically be kind of very built out, very structured sales and adjacent teams. From your experience, kind of at what point in that continuum do you think it's the right time for founders and operators to think about building out a RevOps function?
I am a fan of building it out as soon as possible, right? I think some folks will wait until they have a certain number of salespeople or a certain number of customer success folks. But to me, that level of kind of insight that they're bringing, the earlier the better, right? Because you want to be
Mm,
correcting on your go-to-market strategy, especially as you're trying to figure out where you have product market fit or you don't. I think having someone who can be those eyes and ears while you're, early sales folks or early customer success folks, whoever it might be, are focused on the, bringing in new prospects. Having someone that can be, hey, I think we should be running more tests here, or this isn't working, the
mm,
sooner the better. You get a lot of scale out of this role. An impact that is felt pretty wide across the organization. So, I'm a fan of hiring this person, in parallel with your first, AE or certainly your first
mm.
sales leader. They will have an impact even if you don't have a team of 30 reps.
Absolutely. I mean, as you kind of said earlier, it seems more like a kind of thought process, like a framework that can be started really from day one. And then, obviously kind of getting that infrastructure in place as early as possible is going to make sure that everyone's kind of aligning on day one when they're starting, instead of having to bring together those maybe slightly different teams later on in the process, then trying to drag them back into like a central path.
Yeah, and like you often see every company I've been at, there's always yeah, this was back before we had this in place or this person in here or
Yeah.
this process in place, right? It was the Wild West, this and that. So, there's a lot, get it done right from the start, right? Have someone who knows what they're doing in terms of setting up your CRM instance, whoever you're going to use, setting up your marketing automation platform correctly, right? So an expert who's done it before, I think will
Mm.
save a lot of like pain and heartache and rework down the line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would love to touch on, some of the more practical pieces of advice, kind of getting set up from day one a bit later. Maybe as we continue talking about that kind of continuum between kind of, early stage all the way through, what role does RevOps play as the company matures? And how do you kind of adapt that strategy during different phases of growth?
As a company matures, I think the function or the impact that RevOps has, I don't think changes materially, but I think you're able to now build in specialization, right? As you
Mm,
grow, you can start to say, okay, within my RevOps organization, I'm going to have a marketing ops specialist or,
mm,
someone focused on the customer side of the house or someone focused on new business side or that kind of, tech expert who's going to really own the tech stack and whatever Salesforce or CRM changes we want to make or marketing automation changes we want to make. So the I think the scope and mandate of the organization doesn't necessarily change as you grow and scale, but I think what it allows you to do is specialize a bit more. So you have people that are, laser focused on your new business funnel or your customer success process or whatever it might be.
So it's really kind of at that stage about kind of scaling the infrastructure, right? Being able to, divide the RevOps into like separate different layers of insight, I guess, whether that's on the marketing pipeline side, and then kind of letting a kind of sub-function leader kind of run with that, it seems.
Yep, exactly.
And, I think a lot of people will be thinking kind of, what are the key metrics that you use to kind of measure success of that team? And how do you kind of track, improvements quarter over quarter or year over year?
Yeah, it is tricky, right? Because they are not directly impacting, pipeline generation or
Mm,
one rates, right? So, you can do things around Salesforce, CRM, hygiene, or whatever it
mm,
might be. What I tend to like to do is pick a KPI or two to focus on for, a 6-month process, right? So maybe it's we're trying to improve our win rate by, X percent, or our renewal rate, or our discount rate, and things where I do think that the RevOps function, by shining a bright light on something we're doing well or not doing well, and driving adherence to a process or a system, can impact that KPI. That's where I've seen some success before, in the past. It is a tricky balance, because again, they're not directly impacting, close one business or renewals. Everyone in my revenue org always is gold on our top line goals, right? So I want everyone to have some skin in the game. So whether that is the quarterly new business number or the quarterly, renewal number or expansion or whatever it might be, they certainly always have that part of their variable comp, because I want
yeah.
everyone to have some skin in the game on our overall success as a business.
Interesting. So, I mean, what I get a sense of there is obviously this kind of one is kind of enhancing focus in these kind of sprints. Then secondly, is kind of making sure that everyone's aligned. I think the third piece I'd be curious to kind of get your sense of is, incentivization and compensation. Like, how do you kind of look at that as a RevOps team member when they don't have, direct applicability to typical kind of sales KPIs as such?
Yeah. You got to be careful, right? Because you don't want to over incentivize them on things that maybe, you know, cause them to make, different decisions or look for
Yeah.
trends that are, in support of them making more money in their variable comp plan, right? If it's heavily focused on new business, they may make some recommendations or be looking for some signals that are not real, but are in support of generating, more new business at the expense of margin, for example.
Mhm.
It tends to be a role where it's more heavily base comp structured versus variable. But again, I do want them to have some skin in the game so that when the company does well or this revenue work does well, they are reaping those rewards because they clearly, have been a part of that. And when we're struggling a little bit, right, I want them to be a part of the, feel like we're one team and they're working to get the ship righted. So, it tends to be like an 80-20 kind of, base to variable mix, maybe even 90-10,
Mhm.
depending on the level and role and size and stage. But again, certainly want them to have some skin in the game for overall performance of the revenue work.
Absolutely. No, it seems like a very delicate balance, and I'm sure kind of every company in each stage is kind of different and kind of matures as the company grows. Um, Maybe we could change tack a little bit. Would love to jump in some kind of practical advice you have for, founders and operators listening here. To any, founder or operator saying to build out their RevOps function today, what do you think are the kind of necessary 2 or 3 ingredients for excellence, either in the hire or the kind of functioning of the team?
Well, the first hire in, right? I think you need someone who is clearly a self-starter, and can operate with minimal direction. And this can be tricky, right? Because you probably can't afford a seasoned leader who's done this for 15 or 20 years. but you want someone that, has seen what good looks like. So I've tended to look for people that have come from, larger, RevOps organizations where they've, worked with, excellent leaders or first line managers and have seen what good looks like and can take that, and bring it to your organization. But they have that independence and initiative and a real self-starter to kind of do things, independently and on their own. And I, ideally someone that you can grow with for a couple of years.
Mm.
Doesn't necessarily have to be the future head of a large function, right? That's probably a unicorn. Maybe you get lucky, but certainly someone that can grow with you for a couple years and hopefully stay on when you bring on maybe a more experienced leader, and if not, that's okay too. But someone that has that ability to get stuff done without being told what to do day in and day out. I think you need someone that's incredibly collaborative, right? This is one of the more cross-functional, roles in any organization. Their constituents are sales and marketing and customer success and the finance organization and quite often the IT organization, when it comes to implementing technology, right? So, they have to have that ability to work really well with people from, all different walks of life, all different functions, and really understand what it takes to get things done. And to that point, you just have those people in an organization who are incredibly resourceful and
Mm.
know like how to get the resources they need to be successful, which could be dollars or could be people or whatever it might be. But they understand what it takes to get those resources to be effective. And those and that was always the easiest things to test for. But I think time and time
Yeah.
again, I've seen high performing RevOps leaders or ICs. Those are pretty consistent traits.
And you touched on kind of a follow-up question there, which was, obviously you can see a lot of this in their previous experience, resume, speaking to their teams they've worked with and things. But is there anything specifically in the process that you typically ask or maybe as a case study kind of send out to get a better sense of these kind of capabilities?
I tend to ask questions around examples where you did something for the first time at an organization,
Ah,
right?
interesting.
Not where you've done things better or more effectively, but give me an example of where you implemented a process that was new to the organization or put in a new piece of technology for the organization or rolled out a new comp plan or whatever it might be. How'd you go about doing that? How'd you get the resources that you need? How'd you get the buy-in, et cetera, et cetera?
That's really helpful. Appreciate that. And on a slightly different track, especially having done this at multiple different orgs at this point, what's the number one mistake you see companies making when they're kind of building out this RevOps function?
Um, well, to my point earlier, you might hire too senior or
Yeah.
too junior, right? So you just get it wrong on, you want that person who's got 20 years of experience and they say all the
Mhm.
right things. They're ready to, be scrappy and get their hands dirty and help build something out. And then, they get into your organization and they're used to having a team of a few people and they're used to having a fully built tech stack and all those things. And it's like, organ rejection. And then obviously vice versa, someone that just hasn't done it before, can be the complete opposite. That's one. I think, two, over investing in technology. Uh,
Mm.
there is so much sales tech out there right now. It's dizzying. It can be very easy to buy a piece of technology for every single thing, that you need to get done in the sales
Yeah,
process. Right? It's wild and it's exploded in the last 5 years. Uh,
absolutely.
Sometimes tech is the answer, but oftentimes I think you got to kind of figure it out yourself, and then figure out where technology can enable or make a process more efficient or eliminate the human element of it. But too often companies look for the tech solution first without really understanding what is the problem they're trying to solve.
I love that. I think spot on, and we see this often, right? Of exporting a lot of, unfortunately, what is just really tough work, figuring out what product market fit looks like and how to scale, and outsourcing that to, you know, whether it's a piece of technology, a consultant, and things of that nature, when in reality, that's got to be the founding team and like the kind of key exec team's job. And it's a constant process of iteration. And it's not until you have, full security in that kind of knowledge that you can look, I think, to then bring technology into that really to scale rather than like figure it out, I think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You gotta put in the work and to figure out exactly what your needs are before you go spend 50K on a fancy piece of software.
Exactly. Well, while we're on the topic, would love to jump into tools a little bit. What have been kind of the most impactful tools, for your RevOps processes today?
Obviously, you've got your, I think, core tech stack that any startup leader and operator is going to need, right? A CRM, a conversational intelligence tool for
Yeah,
call recording and call analysis, right? There's all the major players there. A lead routing tool is, if you're heavily inbound, is really, really important and helpful. But I think for me, what's been most impactful is a BI tool. The dashboarding and reporting that you get from a CRM is usually pretty basic
yeah,
and probably fine for your first 12 months. But as you start to, grow in terms of headcount and grow in terms of, geography or products you're selling, a tool that can ingest all of your data and be manipulated and present, kind of trends and analysis in a really streamlined way is found to be super important. I've used many, out there.
yeah.
And each has their pros and cons. We use Sigma at Thoropass, and it's been a game changer for us, just in really kind of helping business leaders from many different parts of the organization really understand what's happening in various parts of the business, whether
Yeah.
that's industry segments or new business or renewal rates, et cetera. So a BI tool is certainly one that I would invest in, sooner rather than later.
Okay, that's really helpful. And maybe while we're on that topic, the kind of use of data and analytics within the RevOps function, especially as it relates to, predicting revenue outcomes and informing decision making. It sounds like the BI tool is a big part of that. Maybe you can go in a bit more detail over like what types of data and analytics you guys are typically looking at, how you're kind of reporting that back into the organization as well.
I love it for cohort data, right? Looking at different cohorts of customers and new business and how are they trending over time, right? So seeing if there are trends there around when new customers came on board and how are they performing from a retention and upsell perspective. That can be tricky data to pull together and track, and a BI tool is really useful for that. Marketing efficiency, looking at, whether that's your PPC spend and your efficiency there and how, those dollars are translating on the other side into SQLs and ARR. I find a BI tool can be super helpful for that as well. On the customer side, really, really helping you understand, the renewal trends, right? Like, what are
Mhm.
your deals that are at risk? And what is it about those deals that are consistent, right? So we can get ahead of that, right? If we're finding that we're seeing a lot of renewal risk in companies below a certain amount of ARR or a certain geo, or I want to see that data regularly so I can then use that to kind of focus my CSMs in the appropriate place. So the trend data is really, really useful, and a BI tool is kind of best equipped to kind of show that and update it, real time.
Yeah. And especially it sounds like kind of shift from being, historically more reactive, where you got those kind of end of month numbers. You were like, okay, let's look at the problem and try to fix it. Rather than now, it seems like much more proactive. This, close to real time data, day by day, week by week, allows you to kind of, as a CRO, make more informed decisions kind of earlier.
Exactly. Exactly.
Maybe we could talk about the future a little bit, and the future of RevOps specifically. Curious how you see the role of RevOps evolving over the next, 5-ish years, especially with the rise of some of the tools that you're probably referencing on the AI side. We've seen a bunch of work on, the AI SDRs and increasing segmentation tools and even creation of, materials and cold outreach and things like that. And of course, all the automation that comes with that too. Like very curious for your take there, having obviously used all these tools for a number of years now.
Yeah. In the past, RevOps would be, dumping a bunch of data into spreadsheets and crunching the numbers and that now is being done by, a bunch of these BI tools, or certainly AI tools, right? So what that means, I think, for to be an effective RevOps leader moving forward is what is the data telling us, right? Translating data into insights and into actions. And I think that's it's really pivoting to being a strategic thinker, a forward thinker, and an interpreter of the data, versus
Mm.
reading out what's happening in the business. So I think the future of the function is hopefully one that's even more impactful. It's saying, okay, here are the trends, and this is what this is what we think it means, and here are the recommendations we are making to you, the CRO or CMO or head of whoever it is,
Yeah.
the change we need to make in the business, and that it's harder because that's a different muscle, right? And that's no longer like a behind the scenes back office number cruncher. This is, someone who's really impacting the business, making recommendations and delivering, insights that the data is uncovering.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any particular like types of tools that you guys are experimenting with or have had success with? I mean, we've seen a plethora of new things in the last kind of 6 to 12 months in particular.
There's a couple of tools that are, leveraging AI to mine a lot of our call recordings
Hmm.
and pick out trend data from those. And a lot of those tools have their own native AI capabilities, but I found them to be like fairly ineffective so far.
Mhm.
So there are some third-party tools and plugins that we've been piloting that will read your transcripts, and mine the calls on a week-to-week basis, and then kind of surface some trends and insights on a weekly basis. So I'll get an email every Monday that says, the tool read 134, calls from last week, and we noticed that, this competitor was mentioned the most often, and it sounds like pricing was a real challenge for most of your prospects last week, and blah, 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 blah. So, basically taking, transcripts and turning it into some type of structured data and insights that you can actually do something with. Because, let's face it, especially in a high volume type of business like where we're in, my on a weekly basis, there's probably 100 customer facing calls that are recorded, if not more.
Yeah.
It's impossible for me or our sales managers to listen to, even 10% of them. So a tool that can surface those themes and trends for us is really, really powerful.
Absolutely. I mean, there's an insight from every single call, right? Whether it was a hard no or a
Yeah.
soft yes, there's insights from all of them, and getting that into one place has a lot of value. As we kind of come to a close here, curious what you think, if there's anything that founders and operators listening should keep in mind for the future of the category.
Where RevOps sits is really important. I think most folks just default to it reporting up into sales, into
Mm.
the org. But I've actually seen it work the other way. In fact, at Thoropass, it sits in the finance organization, which when I first got here, I was a little bit skeptical of. I've always had it reporting directly up into me, but I've actually found it to be a pretty powerful setup because sitting in finance, one, there's less bias, right? So when RevOps surfaces some data, and I go to my CFO and say, hey, we've got a big opportunity here. I think we might need to hire a couple more AEs, or I think we need to invest in this piece of technology, or whatever it might be. And I'm basing these on recommendations from RevOps. it's a little bit more credible, versus when it sits in sales, it might seem like a self-serving recommendation that I'm making. And number two, it's the nice balance, right? Sitting in finance, they're not quite as influenced or impacted by what a sales leader may want them to do, or a customer success leader. So it's a you need someone who's highly collaborative, even more so if you're going to set it up that way. And again, incentives, as we talked about, will be important to ensure they still have some skin in the game to support sales. But I've now seen it work really well, reporting up into the revenue or up into finance. And that was a learning for me from previous roles.
Absolutely. Well, I think with that, we're kind of up on time here and really appreciate those kind of closing remarks. I don't know if you want to quickly just talk about Thoropass, and especially for anyone listening, obviously you guys work with a bunch of different startups. What should they kind of reach out for you for, or when should they reach out to someone like yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I think if you're an early stage founder, you'll probably find that you're going to be asked to comply with SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or high trust, whatever it might be, the alphabet soup of compliance frameworks. You're going to be asked earlier and earlier to comply with those, especially if you're trying to win some mid-market or enterprise business. We were purpose built to help companies do that. We are both the compliance automation platform that makes getting audit ready easier, and we are also the auditor. So it's a one-stop shop, a closed loop ecosystem that basically makes the whole process of getting compliant easy, and then we perform the audit for you. It's a much easier process, lower cost, and one that we're finding is increasingly the way to pursue your compliance frameworks. We call it the Oro way, and like I said, we're servicing early stage startups with a few employees up to 5,000-10,000 employees, who are doing multiple frameworks at the same time. So happy to help. Give us a call.
Awesome. Yeah, can very much attest to that. Actually, just made an intro for you guys just before jumping on this call to one of our pipeline companies in the healthcare space. So broad applicability and absolutely the name to go to here. Bryan, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation on RevOps. Hopefully we can do this again soon and see if some of your predictions come right and kind of catch up from there.